Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given. Hello, and welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Karen W. On today's podcast, we'll be talking about lament, something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. On today's podcast, we welcome Matt and Jackie LeFevers. They are the worship leaders at the Church The Well. They did a series about 4 months ago called Story and Song, Finding Ourselves in the Psalms. I love the series, and we will have a link to the series in our show notes. I think it's very relevant to talk about lament, since most of our listeners are survivors of abuse and have suffered much. Lament has a place in our culture, just like it did in ancient Israel. So welcome to the show, Matt and Jackie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're happy to be here.
Yeah. I think this is such a relevant topic, like I said, and I'm hoping it will encourage our listeners.
Continuing with part 2.
I absolutely love how you shared how our pain can be transformed into art. And you mentioned the song Vapor, which is one of my favorite songs. And if you've not heard it, any of our listeners, you need to go look it up. It's by Michael Gungor, and they've got a new album out. I just have listened to a few songs from that. But you say that the work of an artist is an expression of hope. Did you want to expound on that idea?
Yeah, art is incredibly important to both Matt and I. We initially, I think, kind of bonded over our love of creating, and not just independently, but with one another and with a group of people, of what can come together when you bring your voices together. So the art is incredibly important to us. We're songwriters and artists. And art can help us imagine a different world. Sometimes a book or a movie or a song, it can open our eyes to a better version of how life could be. So I think that's one of the elements that we get in the Psalms, is the new orientation is that hope, just as art can be hope. It can be creating something beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's positive, encouraging art, and then there's kind of dark, vulnerable art. And I've come to think both are actually really important, because you can walk out of a movie or a book or something thinking like, what a beautiful vision for how the world could operate. Like, I would love to try and make that happen somehow. Or you can walk out of a documentary or a book or something thinking like, wow, I had no idea that this situation was so dark or whatever.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's valuable too, because we can't make the world better until we see it clearly the way it is right now.
Yeah.
And so I hold a lot of space in my heart for dark, vulnerable music and art and stuff as well. It's like sometimes you need to just vent about it's not fair the way things currently operate. And then from that, maybe you can be inspired to create change. But both things are valuable.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I didn't pick up the guitar for like 10 years. And I just picked it up again because it was very difficult for me, because I did do worship with my ex-husband, and our I know what you're saying by art, because when your voices blend like that and God just makes it so beautiful, it was very hard for me to sing by myself after that. So
one visualization that I really appreciate about, comparing art to kind of the emotions of the human experiences. If you have a black canvas and put a white dot on it, that white dot is all the more striking. And likewise, if you have a white canvas and you put a black dot, like, your eyes go to that, the vastness and the void.
Yeah.
So it's having that contrast of the darkness seems so much darker when it's surrounded by light, and the light seems so much brighter at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
along the same lines, you say that the world is not as it should be, but we as co-creators with God, with artwork, church, or family and friends, can contribute to what is broken in the world and offer our take on hope. I just wanted to amplify that thought again, as it is so needed in our world. Anything else you'd want to say on that?
Yeah, I think I speak for both of us that's one of our favorite images, is that idea of co-creating with God. That's something we've written songs about and stuff. One of the very first things that happens in the Bible in Genesis 1 and 2 is God creates the world and then delegates it to women and men to continue the work of managing it and continuing to order it and create it. And so this idea that creation isn't over, it's still happening. Creation began at a certain point, but it's still an ongoing process. And I don't think that needs to mean something huge. I think sometimes doing a small good act for someone, or making a piece of art that's honest, or sharing, sitting down with someone who's grieving and just holding space for them. Like, these small things can continue contributing to the creation of the world.
Yeah.
There's this Hebrew phrase in Judaism, tikkun olam, that means the repair of the world. And that's how I think anything you're doing that is repairing the world, whether it's big or small, it's chipping away at that work.
I like to think of it that way.
Yeah.
It's encouraging. So we're just going to end with just some quotes I found from a few articles when I was researching on this subject. It really encouraged me, and you can comment if there's anything you'd want to add. So the first quote is, "Lament is prayer to God about distress. Lament is vital prayer for the purpose of God because it enables them to petition for God to help deliver them from distress, suffering, and pain. It is designed to persuade God to act on the sufferer's behalf." The author of this devotion was Heath A. Thomas, continues his thought that some consider the lament psalms off the mark, but says that Habakkuk, among other texts, shows that followers of God indeed must speak to God this way. Humans possess neither the mind of God nor the perspective of God. As a result, we must go to God when we are confused, or when we see injustice, like we've been talking about, or when we experience pain. Lament prayer is not God-denying language, but God-affirming language that reveals radical faith in God and a firm understanding of our dependence upon Him for all things.
I think that's true for sure on that.
Yeah.
Because it's when you go to God with that you do get answers. Sometimes He does speak to you logically, and you're like, oh,
yeah.
That's when you hear Him. But go ahead. Sorry.
I love that quote. I think that being honest with God about your doubts and your pain and your anger actually displays more faith, even if it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But the fact that we can go to God, we can go to the throne, and we can say, I'm not sure about this. That is so much faith and trust in God to take that and to hold that.
Yeah. I totally agree.
The major literary context of lament lie in the Psalms, Job, Jeremiah, and Lamentations. These all contain laments, which are prayers, and they articulate a variety of sources of pain, enemies, sin, and even the activity of God. Notice that these are not petty complaints, but serious issues of injustice about which the lamenter cannot keep silent. Whereas praise looks back at what God has done in the past in salvation, lament looks forward to what God will do in the present and future in salvation. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that I kept running across, is that a lot of lament psalms talk about the past that way, because having enough trust in God to lament openly sometimes kind of comes from a place of, we know you've done great things for us in the past. Like and it'll recite this litany of, God, you came through for us in this situation and in this situation. And because of that, we're asking for help now, where it's taking trust based on those past experiences with God, and it's kind of extending it into the future and asking for help.
Yeah. And I think we all can relate to that too. This is a quote from another excellent devotion on lament by Elizabeth Lewis Hall, who is a professor of psychology at Biola University. And she wrote this after being diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer and was forced to confront her own suffering in a new way. So this is her quote: "Lament is an ancient Christian practice modeled by Jesus. It assists us to reconstruct meaning when suffering leaves us disoriented," kind of like what you were talking about. In Hebrews 5:7, it says, "In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who is able to save him from death." Jesus practiced handing over his suffering to God. When Lazarus died, he lamented. When faced with his upcoming death in the Garden of Gethsemane, he lamented. On the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" quoting a psalm of lament. And shortly after that, he cried out, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," before dying, quoting yet another psalm of lament.
And we already did touch on that a little bit earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Okay, here's the next quote. "Suffering is profoundly disoriented. It shakes up our assumptions about the world and our place in the world, about the way we think things should be." She goes on to say her cancer diagnosis was incompatible with her view of God as a loving God. She said there has to be an adjustment of views or beliefs with this new information, and that lament is putting into words what a person is experiencing. She says, "The structure of a lament begins to restore some sense of order in the midst of chaos."
Yeah, that really hit home to me when I read that, because my dad was diagnosed with cancer like the end of October. And there was just one day he thought he was having a stroke, and they rushed him to the hospital. He was airlifted to Phoenix, and then they found out he had this brain tumor. And so he lasted for 5 months, but this was in the midst of me dealing with that myself and just trying to, wrestle all that out. And I thought, I was putting myself also in my dad's shoes and thinking like, gosh, how would I react, and it could happen to any of us, but just that's to me got to be one of the most difficult things to deal with, is getting some kind of diagnosis like that. And so I like how she, was able to wrestle that out with God. So I like how she kind of put that in words that we can all relate to, and if we're not going through something that difficult.
I think there's something so beautiful about bringing that pain and disorientation to God, because it's really easy to understand going the other direction with it, like shutting down and not praying and not wanting to talk to God or acknowledge God. And, that's an understandable reaction too, but it shows so much faith. It's really inspiring to me when someone can bring that to God. And even if it's just to unload or vent or cry out, it's showing such a level of trust and faith, even if you don't really know what you believe in that moment.
Yeah. And not knowing the outcome.
But I think it's interesting. The structure of a lament begins to restore some sense of order in the midst of chaos. Is that like a spiritually, because we're lamenting, God kind of spiritually restores order? Like, I'm trying to understand
I think to me, I took it as more as, I don't know, like to get that diagnosis, like you've got cancer and it's aggressive cancer, and this is your outlook. It's, to me, that's chaos. That would feel chaotic. And then, I don't know, to me, lamenting and giving it to God, it starts to have a little, I don't know, that's how I took it anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys have any other outtake or outlook on that, or.
I kind of looked at it as the kind of the catharsis of releasing the emotions. And so, if you've had that weeping pain and you get to the end of that where you're just kind of catching your breath, like that calm after letting everything out it's always welcomed.
Yeah.
Of just that feeling of relief and calm and kind of grounding. So I the word I keep coming back to is catharsis.
That's good.
And I like that grounding, because for me as an abuse survivor, I need to feel grounded. But I love this because I feel like after 5 years, I'm just starting. This is a perfect podcast for me because I feel like I just want to scream. I'm just starting to deal with emotion, and it's good. It's not bad. I look at it like, okay, this is good, but this is perfect for me right now. Karen's already had that experience with the anger and stuff, and I'm just starting to like,
it's okay. You can get angry.
Yeah, I need to release that so that there can be that calming and that grounding.
Yeah.
It makes sense now to me. Now it makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Well, and I think something the Psalms do, it's twofold. For one thing, it gives you permission to do that with your own words, because other people, 2,000, 2,500 years ago were doing that with their own words. So you know that it's okay to be that vulnerable.
Yeah.
But also you can use their words, which is what like Jesus is doing on the cross, where he's quoting a psalm that's important to him. And it's sometimes praying with someone else's words. For one thing, it gives you something to say if you don't know what to say, but also it connects you to that story that goes back where that other people have felt this way. That other people have prayed these words.
Yeah.
You're not alone.
Yeah. There's a sense that we all have that in common,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Psalm 13 says, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? And Hall, this is another quote from Hall, says that our culture finds suffering uncomfortable and consequently thinks we often try to help other people who are suffering by trying to distract them or point out the silver linings or other things that avoid engaging with them and coping and processing their pain. This really spoke to me because I think in our culture, we really do try to do that a lot. That's kind of a pet peeve of mine and I know people mean well. I think they just want to make you feel better and maybe they're uncomfortable with it. So they are saying something too, but that really struck me when I read that.
I used to do that with Karen all the time. she used to be like, I don't want you to say anything. So I learned from it.
Yeah, people are intuitively, I think, very uncomfortable with pain. And so you either flip into trying to fix it mode or trying to find some silver lining where it's going to be fine. And it takes a lot of spiritual maturity and almost maybe even fighting your own instincts to just sit with someone's pain and just to be present with them during it and not try to get in there with like, it's going to work out. This is part of some plan or, the trite things we say.
Yeah.
One of my victories as far as kind of adjusting the way that I interact with people when they're in pain or they're grieving is I have tried incredibly hard to eliminate the phrase at least from my vocabulary. There is no at least. So when someone is in pain, it is what it is. And, on some level, everyone knows what the good possibly is, but there's no comfort in that.
Yeah.
When someone is in pain.
Yeah. And I think it's okay just to have that uncomfortableness. Like, I mean, I've been with people before where you don't know what to say and you don't need to say anything. You don't need to, you'll strain your brain to try to think of something. And it's like, no, at those moments, you don't really need to say anything. Even if you just cry along with them is okay. Or if you don't have anything to say, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm learning all that. I came from a very unemotional family growing up. So a lot of it's new to me.
Yeah.
Like I just never really felt things before, and now it's all coming out like a rushing river. So, well, Hall says, lament introduces that possibility of intimacy with God as we experience being deeply seen in our relationship with God. And so we find relief from our suffering. It becomes woven deeply into the fabric of God's faithfulness, which is celebrated in the Psalms.
Yeah, there's something, I get so much encouragement from the fact that the lament psalms and the praise psalms are just right next to each other in the Bible, because to me, it says that trusting in God and asking questions and being vulnerable are both part of the Bible's picture of following God.
Yeah.
And that they're both part of that intimacy. Like there's so much, we've touched on it already in this conversation, but there's so much trust that it shows in God to be that honest, to say, I know you love me enough that I can unload this at you and you still won't leave, basically, is, I think, actually so much more trust than having this, like in human relationships, there are people we have these surface level relationships with where it's like, I know I can talk to this person about the weather or how work's going or something, but I don't like really open up with them. And then there's people we could ugly cry in front of.
Yeah.
And it would be fine. And they would give us a hug. And like, I want to have that kind of relationship with God, not the first kind.
Yeah.
So
right.
I think it's preferable to have that kind of raw, vulnerable, even if it's the things you're saying are kind of ugly or you don't really mean, it's preferable to having this super fake, superficial, shallow, like not talking about real stuff kind of relationship.
Yeah. Because there are things that really hurt you in life that you just have to be able to verbalize to God. So the last quote is from Eugene Peterson, who wrote the message that all true prayer pursued far enough will become praise. It does not always get there quickly. It does not always get there easily, but the end is always praise. So I like that quote. So that's wrapping it up. Is there anything else you guys would want to add or say?
We're so thankful for the invitation to have this conversation with you. And we really appreciate what you're doing with this podcast. In this podcast, we talked about the power of being vulnerable with God. And I so appreciate the vulnerability that can be done through these types of podcasts and how much healing comes from that. So thank you both for all that you do.
Oh, thank you. We
definitely.
appreciate that. I thank you guys both because I used to go to the well. I really don't have a home church right now. I'm kind of go here and there, but I still listen to the well now and then. And I was going to the well at a place where I was really figuring out things. And I love the rawness and the realness of the well. I still, pop in every now and then, but I know when I heard that message, I even sent it to my son who's an artist and, he's going through his own struggles spiritually. And so I just love that you guys had this conversation. I really appreciate you guys, talking about this and being with us on the podcast today.
Yeah, well, I'm still reading that last quote. Trying to take it in. So I'm just trying to figure out. So if I lament long enough, then it does turn into praise. Like, how does that, that's great because that's where I want to be. But just, is that like a spiritual thing that it just, as you release those emotions, then it turns into praise? Or what do you guys think on that?
I wonder if it's maybe saying that like leaving the lines of communication open. And if we just keep going to God with the things that we're feeling and we just keep bringing those things to God, that eventually that's where it will end up.
Yeah, I think you either get to it. Yeah, that's kind of how I read it too. That either you get to an acceptance of, there's some things there is no pretty bow to put on. Even when if you go through a death or something like that, it's hard to always see the good, but you just know that God's, I don't know, I think it's just coming to that trust of.
And knowing that he does work out all things for good where that scripture comes in. Yeah. Because eventually it's going to work out.
Yeah.
Even though I didn't think 5 years after what happened to me, I would be sitting here okay and just beginning to lament and go through all this, but I'm okay.
Yeah.
So,
well, you've come a long ways.
Yeah.
We talked about that before on the podcast.
Yeah.
You've come such a long ways from when I first met you and you are feeling your feelings, which may be more painful in some ways.
It's very painful.
but it's good because it's bringing healing to you.
Yeah. That's why I'm reading these so deeply because I'm like, okay, so it's all going to be okay.
This pain will last forever. It is painful.
It's like, I feel like I've been going through a dark night of the soul almost because it's so painful.
Well, there are seasons like that, I think, where it feels like such a painful season.
Yeah.
And so I think, to know that it isn't going to always be so painful.
Yeah. I can't wait for the joy. Now you mentioned joy, right?
Joy will come.
Turn mourning into dancing. I like that too.
Yes.
So
exactly.
Well, we thank you so much for being on the podcast, for taking the time, out of your Saturday. And we will have a post to the link so that any of our listeners want to listen to your message from the well, we'll have that link to that. So thank you again so much.
Yeah. Thank you for so much on covering this topic. It's important to me, Karen, and all of our listeners. So thank you so much for doing this for us.
Yes.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And hopefully I will get to meet you guys in person someday.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your time.
Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
All right. Bye. I gotta make sure I know how to pronounce her last name.
Can you
it looks like LeFevers, but
oh no, that's perfect.
That's right, LeFevers.
Oh, is it? Okay. I'm really good at messing people's names up. So.
People are really good at messing that name up, so I'm actually impressed.
Okay, good.
Oh no, it would be way too hard not to edit. I don't know how people do those Facebook lives. Could you imagine what ours would sound like?
Either.
We'd be like, now you talk about in this series how the Psalms are not narrative stories. That's what say stories.
Oh yeah. Typo.
No, I'm kidding.
Matt, go forth. Be angry.
Sure.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.